in retrospect, what was happening between November and April is I was kind of getting my heart ready and getting stronger with my relationship with myself during that time so that I could make a big change that was going to completely have a massive ripple effect throughout every part of my life, every relationship I had, my identity, all of those things.
Hello, welcome to Act Inspired Behavior, the show about real people and their real stories of transformation and change, told through the lens of acceptance and commitment therapy. I'm Gabby Lanier. So today we're going to talk about rules. Rules are this ubiquitous word that we use to describe something we must or must not do, and usually we try to follow them. And if you're the sort of person like me who tends to follow rules, they can become very powerful. They can govern behavior. They can change the way that you live your life. And if you stop and think about it, once learned, rules are just thoughts. Sometimes the rules are not so obvious, and the very thoughts that we have in our head can become very rule-like. Our guest today, her name is Jessica Zielske. She's going to share about how she learned what her rules were in the first place and how she broke some of those rules. And before we get there, I want to share how I so very much related to Jessica's story. Perhaps as you listen, you can think back to a time now or in the past when you were stuck by some of these rules too. I told a piece of this story in the first episode. This was kind of a parallel struggle that I was experiencing at the time, and one that was very much characterized by a set of rules. It was the struggle of deciding whether or not to stay and continue living with my husband's parents. And this was a situation in which I really had to actively confront the rule that was constantly chattering in my head, and then eventually get to the point where I was actively breaking the rule. For me, one of the big rules was you have to buy a home. You have to buy a home or else you are not an adult. Now, this rule came from somewhere, and it became an even stronger rule for me when I was 24, when I recently came home after traveling for about 2.5 years. And so one day I'm sitting down with my 9-year-old niece. It had been 2 years since I'd really spent any time with her. And as we're eating lunch, she's suddenly kind of just stopping. She's putting her fork down, and then she looks straight at me, right in the eye, and she says, "Gabby, when are you going to move out, grow up, and start being a grown-up?" Oh my gosh. I was so mad when she told me that. And I think one of the reasons why I was so mad was because it felt very true. It was like the worst part of my internal dialogue just kind of coming out in broad daylight. And from my 9-year-old niece, no less, who used to, I thought, look up to me. And in this moment, I was just crushed. And so, yes, this phrase, it stuck with me for a very long time, and it was triggered again and again and again in my head. It repeated so many times. And what it meant to me was like, when are you going to move out in order to be an adult? You have to buy a house in order to be responsible. And it just carried through wherever I went, wherever I lived. It just, wasn't good enough. It wasn't good enough until I became a homeowner. And man, that rule stuck with me for so long. I say that because when I got to the point when my husband and I, we were wanting to buy a home and looking at our finances and thinking, okay, we're in our late 20s. We still don't have enough money to buy a home, not even close. And we're up to our eyeballs in debt. And so, we moved in with my husband's parents. And then after 2 years living with them, we got to the point where we were realizing that we actually wanted to stay with them. We wanted to live with them. I mean, my wish to live with them started years and years and years ago. And I'd have these kind of dreams about living with them. And this, I don't know, I have a very small breed of person who loves this idea of co-housing, of these kind of co-communities. And so I envisioned us living in the upstairs of their house and us meal sharing and doing all this stuff together, right? But I couldn't get myself to actually think that that was a possibility. And when we did, in fact, get to the point where we did decide to live with my parents, my husband's parents, my in-laws, that was one of the biggest moments of breaking rules in my life. Because to me, it was huge. So many decisions that had led up to that moment. Going to graduate school, paying off debt, saving money, like just even the career path that I took, it just felt like it all led up to that moment where I was going to get ready, my husband and I, to buy a home. And in the end, we didn't buy a house. We decided to stay. I just think it's really funny because, I even gotten myself to that point. But it wasn't necessarily because I wanted to be a homeowner. Like I've heard so many other people say, it's that I wanted to relieve this pressure of adhering to this rule that was kind of stuck in my head. It was kind of like this, this checkbox that I had to check off. It just took a little bit of giving myself permission to break that rule, to get to the point where I feel like I could have really stepped into that value wholeheartedly. So, with all of that said, I'm very excited to introduce you to our guest, Jessica, today. She's going to share with you how she broke her own set of rules. Welcome, Jessica. I'm so happy to have you here. How are you doing?
Hi, Gabby. Great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I want to welcome you to the podcast, and I'd love for you to just go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So my name is Jessica Zielske. I currently live in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm a board certified behavior analyst. And so I am a mom of a 75-pound, 9-month-old English cream golden retriever. His name is Riley.
Aww.
He's acquired certain skills. Others were still on the struggle bus. And I live in Atlanta with my husband, and so we are we're over here in Atlanta on the East Coast. Currently, I took the full plunge of being self-employed, so I'm an entrepreneur. So that's kind of what I'm doing right now.
Good for you. So what do you do as an entrepreneur?
Sure. So right now, I provide remote supervision to graduate students. So independent field work, stuff like that. I also do mentorship for newer BCBAs. I do a lot of collaboration stuff like this. Like I really take advantage of the Instagram platform and I start to develop relationships and kind of just, learn more about the field and the different minds and cool people that are in the world out there and just try to get us all connected and learning from each other in this new COVID world we live in. That's like the foundation of being human, right? Like we all want and seek connection. And then, living in a world where some have to quarantine or, everything about our lives has changed. I think that makes it even better, connecting with more and more people and you're not alone.
Totally. Yeah. Okay. Well, it's nice to hear a little bit about you, and you had reached out to me, which I was really grateful for, because I've been really wanting people to just reach out and share things that they want to, as it relates to acceptance and commitment therapy, because I know everyone has their own story, and you probably have a million stories you could share. But I believe that the story that you were wanting to come on and share today was about your divorce and kind of that journey that you went through. Is that correct?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. We'll summarize it that way.
How would you encapsulate the story that you want to share today?
Sure. So I think this is so mentalistic, but it's the only way I've understood it to be written online. If I had to try to summarize it, it's almost like an awakening when you kind of develop self-awareness and you start to look at your life and you start to ask yourself, like, are you living in alignment with your own rules, or are you living in alignment with, the rules you've been taught, and are those linked to your values? And all of that kind of happened for me right before I turned 30. So if you had to summarize it, you'd probably call it like a pre-30 midlife crisis or something like that. Go with that. Yeah, go with that. Call it like a first third of my life crisis. You can do that.
Perfect. Yeah. Yeah, and I know for myself, and I'm sure others too, I went through a quarter life crisis for sure, where it's
Yeah.
complete career change and everything. So, okay, that's wonderful, and I'm glad that we clarified that because people can get a sense of what you're going to share today. So,
Yeah.
okay, so
I think
then
there's
if
humor in that too. I like, let me
yeah,
talk about my crisis.
and
What
honestly,
happened? Yeah.
I think there needs to be a little bit of humor because I know some of the stories that we share can be, they can go really deep.
Yeah.
But also, if you step back and you tell the stories long after they've kind of, you've gone through the process of really thinking through it and reflecting back on it, they can be a little funny too.
Mhm.
We can take a moment and laugh at some of the situations we've put ourselves in, but they make us the people that we are today. So, if you were to kind of trace back to the very beginnings of this story, where would it take you? And do you want to go ahead and share?
Yeah, yeah, let's do it. So when I was still 29 at the time, and approaching 30. I was married in a previous marriage, and I remember I was on a flight to New York, and I remember looking out the airplane window. I was by myself, and I was meeting my mom in New York just for like a getaway back when we could fly whenever we wanted to. And I remember looking out the window and just being like, thinking to myself, like looking at the clouds, and I was just like, is this it, Jess? Like, this is it, right? This is kind of your life. My life wasn't like, I wasn't living in a way, I wasn't the person that I wanted to be leading up to that, right? Like I was drinking a lot of wine. I wasn't taking care of my body in terms of like the quality of the food that I was putting in my body. I just wasn't, like the friendships or relationships that I had weren't rooted in the things that I thought were most important. But I was kind of just like not being honest with myself about those things. So I did that for years.
Yeah.
And it was actually November 15th. I'll never forget that date. November 15th, I was on that flight and I looked out the window, I was over the clouds and I was like, is this it, girl? Because you've been married for, 3.5 years and you're, approaching 30. So the next step, I mean, you already have the dog, you already have the house, you already have the picket fence, you already have a great job, right? Your career. The next step is kids.
I was like, yep, kids.
Yep. Check, 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 check. Rule govern behavior. But, so that was kind of where I was. I was like, the next step is kids, Jess. And you can't really just like undo that. Right.
Mm,
So that was kind of when the story started. Like that was like my wake up call. And between November and going all the way up to April, in retrospect, what was happening between November and April is I was kind of getting my heart ready and getting stronger with my relationship with myself during that time so that I could make a big change that was going to completely have a massive ripple effect throughout every part of my life, every relationship I had, my identity, all of those things. So that's kind of where it started. It started November 15th.
wow, wow. And where did your ex-husband, where did he come in all of this? Because I mean, it sounded like there was this relationship piece with yourself, but what about with him?
Yeah. So I think I had, there was a lot of attempts at communication of like wanting to work on things across the years and even, recommending us to work on some things together in therapy, even just a couple months after we first got married, that, there wasn't really open mindedness on both ends.
Mhm.
And, and I'm a big believer in honest communication and I'm a big believer in being vulnerable and leaning into things that are scary now, so more than ever. So I don't think that we were on the same page on that, and we met when we were so young too. I mean, he's a great guy. I mean, we met when I was in my early 20s. So we had been married for 3.5 years, but we had been together for like 8. And
Okay.
that's
Wow.
a lot of time, right? And I'm hungry for growth all the time. So I mean, I'm different now than I was a year ago, and I'm different now than I was 3 years ago, right? So
Right.
like imagine that much time, how much you can evolve and grow, and how much work and time and effort it takes to grow together. As I grew, I didn't feel like we were growing in the same direction, and I didn't feel like we were growing towards the same things or really valued the same things. So, like, just like quality time. So he was in real estate, and so he would work all weekends, right? Which again is part of the industry. But I would work all week, you know? And
Right.
so again, like figuring out lifestyles and like how do we make that work? And so there were a lot of things. But yeah, that's kind of how I got to November 15th. Repeated communication and just like kind of realizing like, Jess, accepting that this might be what it is. Can you deal with that? Right? Is that going to be enough for you? And I think, I ended up answering that question and, no.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, and there was that no, that answer. And then what was the other part of you saying that was opposite to that? Like what were some of those rule governed thoughts that you were having?
again, I had all these rule governed behavior, rules that were taught, whether shown to me by society or taught to me by my parents, right? Okay, you're 20 this years old. When are you going to get married? Okay, you're married. Okay, you going to get a house? Okay, you going to get a dog? Okay, when are you going to have kids? Right? And so there's societal pressure, community pressure. There's almost these, timelines in your head that come from different places of what you should be doing with your life and what your life should look like by a certain time. And then I just started saying, you know what? Okay, I'm realizing how many rules I have. Number one, this is kind of where this is where I like started developing self-awareness, I think, which is crazy that I took the first almost 30 years of my life to do that. So hopefully if you're listening to this podcast and you got a leg up. So, but
I've met some young 20-year-olds who seem so incredibly self-aware.
I know.
And they seem light years ahead of where I was at the time. And I don't know what it is about them, but it always is so awe-inspiring.
I
It's like,
know.
oh, you're doing this work a decade before I ever.
I,
And
uh,
also one thing that as you were saying some of those rules, I was thinking about the one of, you have all these things. You've checked off all the boxes. Therefore you should be happy. Like these
mm,
things equal happiness. And so then when we don't feel happy, we're like, wait, something's wrong with us. Something
mm.
is like innate. We don't have a sense of gratitude or whatever it might be, but
Yeah. So I think that's kind of where the self-awareness started happening. I started questioning, where did my rules come from? Because that's step one for me. At least for me, that's, were my rules taught? Are these just irrational rules that I have dreamed up?
right.
Where did they come from? Number one. And then are they still serving you? Right? Are they in alignment with the life that you want to live based on the values you've identified? And if the answer is no, then looking and starting to do like deep inner work on what's making you hold on to them and how do you let go of those. Quick plug. I am obsessed with the book Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life by Stephen Hayes. There are probably two books that changed my life, and that was one of them. So anybody who's into this, I would definitely recommend that book.
Okay. Real quick, what was the other book that changed your life?
That's a little bit edgy. It's Untamed by Glennon Doyle. You want to change your life? That book, Untamed by Glennon Doyle, and then Get Out of Your Mind and Get Into Your Life by Stephen Hayes. The combination of that completely changed my life. So obviously Stephen Hayes is like the founder of ACT, right? So he's a big part of this as I was going through that workbook. The hardest part in ACT for me, even now, is diffusion. So creating distance from your thoughts. That's very difficult. And I didn't really even start practicing that skill then. It was really just looking at my values, questioning the rules that I was living by, and then starting to make big decisions and big changes.
Yeah. And what were some of those values? What were the things that really stood out to you?
Well, I definitely know what my values are now. It's hard for me to bring back and give you a concrete list from then. But big values are honest communication, vulnerability, that like leaning into discomfort or things that kind of scare you a little bit, and understanding that there is growth in that. I've always lived that way, but I didn't realize to myself that I was like that, that I had that belief. Sometimes you need to take a pause to realize what you do believe, right? Or what you do value. And I also, again, like coming back in terms of what I valued from a relationship, I wanted to feel valued. I valued feeling valued, I guess.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. So
Yeah. That quality time that you guys can spend together. It's like you have to
yeah,
invest time in each other.
yeah.
I want to pause the story for just a moment because she's talking a lot about rules. Again, what is a rule? When it comes to understanding how to apply some of the strategies from acceptance and commitment therapy, it's important to know that we engage in behavior all day long. Some of that behavior is on the outside, like talking and laughing and swimming and playing, but behavior is also the actions that we do that happens on the inside at that kind of neurological level, the thinking, the feeling, the sensations that we experience. All of those things are also behavior, and some of them are learned and some of them we're just born doing. And it's important to realize that they are actually behaviors too, that they are actions that your mind, your brain engages in on a daily basis. But these behaviors that occur aren't just random. They don't just occur out of nowhere. They are always, always preceded by some event that cues or triggers them. So these rules, they are really thoughts, our thinking behavior that hold a special potency to them because of the fact that we become fused to the thoughts. When we are fused, the thoughts, the feelings, the internal experiences, they feel like our undeniable reality. They play such a huge role in our current experience to the point where we cannot step outside of the thought to see that it's, just a thought, just a private event, not a physical thing that we hold in our hand, not a barrier for us doing the things that we want and need to do for ourselves. But unfortunately, because of the nature of how the human brain functions, we tend to become hooked by the thought. And when we get stuck by these fused thoughts, we are not present to our actual surroundings. It becomes this barrier for us doing things in an opposite way. And so now you know a little bit about fusion to rules, where our thoughts set us up to engage in these patterns of behavior that become habitual to follow the rule our thoughts are telling us to do. So in Jessica's story, she talks about diffusion or diffusion, the opposite skill of being fused to thoughts. In acceptance and commitment therapy, diffusion is one of the 6 skills within that hexagon or that hexaflex, and diffusion is one of those 6 processes. In diffusion, the aim is to unhook from and create distance from those private experiences and to move through the world in a way that is open and slightly detached from these many rules, thoughts, and experiences we have, because we know it's just our mind, our brain muscle engaging in habitual behavior. It's our mind reacting to things constantly. Diffusion is a way for us to step outside of this chatter and see that everything else that is happening in the world, including the things that we care deeply about, the things that we want to be about. So let's take a moment and practice diffusing from a rule that you might have, and we can even go a little step further. Let's say that you're standing at the edge of a river. It's beautiful, it's sunny, and you have the thought, I want to swim in this water, but it'll be cold. I don't have a swimming suit, and if I get wet, I'll be cold and dirty all day. So you stop and you go no further. Now, catch yourself thinking this thought, which is a kind of rule. Are you willing to, or would you be willing to break this rule and see if you can step toward an experience that might challenge you, but also might be incredibly worth it? So you think, hello, rule in my head. I see you there. And then you jump into the freezing cold water anyway, and it takes your breath away. But your smile and your laughter, it comes from this place of childlike joy. Will you be willing to break a rule to step into that place of vitality? Before we get back to Jessica's story, I just want to briefly share about an opportunity to participate in our monthly group meeting called ACT Collective. In this community, we meet to discuss topics related to ACT, review a research article, and practice acceptance and commitment therapy strategies live in session with each other. It's also an excuse for us to get together, laugh, share our goals, and get accountability for following through on our goals. If you're interested in joining, please reach out or check out ACT Collective on my website, actinspiredbehavior.com. Now, let's get back to Jessica's story and see how breaking her own set of rules helped her step into a path and a life that she deeply cherishes. So let's get back to where you were at when you got off that plane, and from the point when you started to kind of start doing that inner work.
I really just started to, kind of deeply connect with myself and shut out some other people's opinions for sure. But I did ask my ex-husband to go to therapy with me again, and I let him know that I was going to move out. I wasn't sure what was going on with the relationship, but I needed some space to think, and I welcomed him, being open to going to therapy with me. And so we did start going to couples therapy. for several months because, again, at that point, I felt like I knew what was going to happen, but I had to be 1000% sure that I think it's such a struggle, right? Is this something that I just need to work on within myself? Or am I doing the inner work I need to, and this relationship actually isn't the right one for me? We have to, at least for me, I'm very careful before I say the problem is someone else. I'm very careful. I want to dissect myself before I kind of jump in saying, oh, it's you. You're the problem. No, I probably just need to meditate.
So and I asked about your values, and you were talking too about the rules, that you had those two things. You're really starting to work on those two things. And then as you're coming kind of through that process, you're starting to make some realizations, right?
Yeah. And again, I haven't heard this term used in ACT, but it's the best way I can describe it, I guess, based on what I was reading. And so, well, I would schedule out time for me to do deep work. Like I really would. I made a whole Zen spot. Like I had like specific candles. I had, like my Spotify playlist with my Zen music. And I would literally make a meeting with myself. And that was kind of when, okay, we got the rules, we got the values. That was kind of when I started to almost like get to know myself all over again. So yeah, so I started to just like reconnect with like how did I kind of become this human that I am today? and and then where do I want to go? But again, I think I find myself now rooting back to ACT, and psychological flexibility and like everything that goes into that hexaplex. I'm just so much more aware of my thoughts. And I question, when I'm so quick to say no to something, or I'm so quick to say that this is the way it has to be, I'm aware that I'm doing that. And then I take a second to ask myself if that's really true. Thoughts are just thoughts, and we kind of decide our relationship with them. And we can't really trust them all the time. Again, coming back to like diffusion. So it's really changed the micro of my life, but ACT has also changed like the biggest part of my life. So between that November 15th and up until now, I have lived in two different places. I have gotten engaged and married again. So I left two jobs and then decided to become a completely self-employed entrepreneur, which is honestly going fabulous. And I didn't even plan for that. Like that just caught fire. Like that was the universe. And I had to give up my dog and left him with my ex-husband. So the only thing that has stayed the same across the last 2.5 years is my car. That's the only thing that's the same. That's the only thing. Then you add a pandemic on top of that, right? So the only thing that stayed the same for me is my car. And honestly, what has gotten me through all of that constant change on the micro level and the macro level is me making space for myself and leaning into ACT and kind of pulling pieces from that and looking through that lens.
Yeah. Oh, I so relate to what you're saying. And I think I remember my mother-in-law once told me, she said, Gabby, when you say no to things, you're saying yes to other things. And it sounds like, you slowly let go of some of these things that some of that rule governed behavior was telling you, you have, once you get married, you have to stay married, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if it's not serving you, you say no to that. It opens the door for so many other things that you can say yes to. Well, and it kind of sounds like you had this series of conversations with your ex-husband. Look, when did that last conversation take place? And how did you get through that using some of these tools that you learned from Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life?
Whew. Well, the last conversation I had with him was at an attorney's office. So we don't need to talk about that one. It was fine.
Let's take a step back then. Yeah.
It was fine. But I would say the last, again, I think the last big conversation when I was still, involved and giving it shots of, and I thought there was hope, or I was at least going to give us every shot, was probably in therapy. But, he kind of had a breakthrough and it was powerful. And I was happy for him because I care about people and I love helping people. But interestingly, it did not change the fact that, I wanted different in my life. I wanted different, and I felt compassion and empathy for him. And I was so happy that he was able to have that moment so that he could move on, and let go of those things that he was holding on to. But it didn't change my mind about it, whether I wanted to be in the relationship.
It really sounds like, this wasn't just for you, this was for you guys, and it was for him. I mean, I'm so curious. Maybe you don't know this information, but how is he doing now? Do you think he's also living a life that he finds more valuable?
I hope he is. He's a great guy. And that's why it was so tough. And I wanted to be so sure. He was my best friend, but I was not passionately in love with him. Like, that's kind of where it was. He was my best friend. We'd grown up together, basically. That's a long time, to be together. And great human. I still wish him all the best. And it looks like he's happy.
Yeah.
But so
It's so true. And I think that what you're saying too, we can have these insights about ourselves. But again, it really goes down to, how do we respond to those thoughts? And what function do we let those thoughts serve in our lives? And it really sounds like for you, you might have some painful moments or painful thoughts or whatever they may be, but you're choosing to respond to them in a way that doesn't automatically push them away. It sounds like you have more self-awareness now, and therefore those thoughts don't serve this pattern of avoidance like it used to. Like, you really confront those things, and then you let the thoughts serve, how they will, whether they're helpful or they're not. Before we leave, I'd love for you to just tell people how they can find you if they want to learn more about you.
Awesome. Yeah. Cool. All right. Yeah. So I do have my own website. So I go by the name The Blonde Behavior Analyst. So my website is www.theblonde, blonde with an E. So blondebehavioranalyst.com. But really, like, my main thing is Instagram. So it's at the Blonde Behavior Analyst. So that's me there. So those are probably the two best ways to find me. But yeah, so I do remote supervision. I do monthly focus groups. So I actually do a monthly focus group on ACT. We go through Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life, because that book has changed my life, and I've gone through it a million times. And so I kind of go on that journey with people in a monthly focus group on that book. I also have a monthly focus group on OBM, so organizational behavior management. And I do mentorship, and I love collaborating. Like Instagram Live or podcast, like, I'm all about it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. This has been really fun. I love starting. Oh, there goes the door. Like a timer. My son's like blanket in his mouth, ready to play with me. I love starting my day like this. This is wonderful. So, Kathy, do you want to say hi to Jess? Say hi, Jess.
Who's Jess?
Hi. Hey, bud.
Hi, Jess.
In this episode, you heard from Jessica, who is now a business owner and deeply committed to a new relationship thanks to her journey of diffusing from her rules. Because she did her own inner work, she has fully stepped into the kind of person she wants to be based on her values of open communication, vulnerability, and valuing herself, valuing being valued. Maybe you connected to her story and can look to something in your life where you can think of a time when you struggled with a rule and chose to break it because it no longer made sense. Or maybe one comes to you right now. Does one come to mind right now? Don't rush this process by smashing all the rules you aren't aligned with in your life. Remember that the first step to diffusion is awareness in the first place. Recognize the rule and call it out for what it is, and then see where it comes from and if it's helpful in you living a life that, when flying in a plane miles above, you can say, "This is it." If you are interested in reaching out and telling your story, or would like to learn more through my blog, workshops, or coaching, find me on Instagram at ActInspiredBehavior, email me at gabby@actinspiredbehaviorcoaching.com, or use the link in my website listed in the show notes. I'd love to hear from you. If this episode resonated with you, subscribe to this podcast and stay tuned for future episodes. And please, if you're interested, go ahead and rate the episode in Apple Podcasts. That would be so helpful. Hello again. I want to take a moment and say that this podcast is for educational purposes only. Content and conversation provided in this podcast should not be taken as or replace professional or therapeutic recommendations. As a board-certified behavior analyst, my goal is to disseminate ACT and behavior analysis to the wider public and have meaningful conversations to further explore our understanding. If you are concerned about your own personal well-being, I encourage you to seek out the help of a licensed professional who can provide individual support to you. Thank you so much.